I'd like to introduce our guest speaker today, Reverend Roy Ayers. And Roy and his beloved Julie have had an impact in this area of Canada because they both had churches here in White Rock and in New Westminster. They moved to Michigan and now they're back, retired as Unity ministers, but are always willing to come and share a message with us. And we're blessed to have Roy here today. Roy has been a minister for over 25 years. He has served in 7 Unity ministries and also did much of his training at the Unity Detroit Temple, which is a very well-known Unity community. He comes with a blessed spirit. He's an incredible musician. I said, we'll have to have you back and jam with some of these wonderful musicians sometime. He has a sense of humor. And I think that's such an important quality to have, and he certainly brings that out. And what I love most about this beautiful man is his tender heart, in which he always is present to anyone that stands in front of him. A very rare quality, that when you're speaking to him, he is there with you, communicating in very conscious ways. A beautiful soul, an incredible minister, here to give his message today. Fear not. Reverend Roy Ayers.
Thank you. Thank you, Janet. The first thing I want to talk about is how delighted I am to be here. Unlike a retired hockey player or firefighter, as a minister, they let you back in the game. And that's what this feels like. I'm back in the game after being away from the pulpit, from the activities of ministry, fully engaged for about 3 years. Okay, it's been about 3 years since I was accountable for a church. So I'm delighted, absolutely, to be in Vancouver and be with you this morning. Thank you for inviting me, Janet. I'm going to talk about consciousness. We can't have the topic of fear not without bringing consciousness right to the center of the conversation. And I want to mention that the nature of consciousness is what we want to establish as step one. And the nature of consciousness is, as we send the white light, the blessing. The nature of consciousness is best understood as a clear field of potential awareness. A clear field of potential awareness. By consciousness, I'm not saying the objects of consciousness, but rather the capacity to perceive things. For example, who knows the maximum fine on Highway 99 for littering? The maximum fine? $2,000. Another perceptive driver. I learned that this morning. Consciousness in an absolute clear state is empty. Just like this glass of water. A metaphor for pristine and clear. And I'll refer to this glass of water throughout the lesson, here and there. If you and I have reached this state of empty and clear in consciousness, you're known as enlightened. You're known as enlightened because nothing is obscuring direct contact with ongoing reality. There are no thoughts going on that report less than the absolute truth of things. Let's imagine being there in an empty, clear state of consciousness with nothing going on. Just present and available. Pure potential. Thank you. So just in a conscious state that's so clear, nothing being reported that's clouded in any way, shape, or form, there are no misunderstandings or emotional turbulences that we're creating inside that consciousness. How much mischief can we create in consciousness? Don't let me count the ways. But our spiritual quest is one of coming to understand the nature of hindrances. Those ideas we carry around in our minds that have the capability to cause us to do this to our wonderful consciousness. All of a sudden, we start thinking certain kinds of thoughts, and that wonderful clarity is no longer present. It starts to get cloudy and murky and colored. Now, how many of you can say, yes, that's me, some of the time? It's not real crystal clear anymore. It's muddled up with the kind of thinking that makes it difficult for any one of us to experience the joy and serenity and the peacefulness that's ours to express. I'm talking about a consciousness that has begun to entertain ideas that aren't true. It's what happens when we bear false witness and when we tell ourselves things about the nature of our experience that are simply not true. And those untrue allegations cloud up our consciousness so that it's not crystal clear anymore. So our work, therefore, is to study our consciousness and become mindful of its activity. And to be on the lookout for those tendencies, those kinds of thoughts that add to our predicament here. And to begin to look at them and replace them. There's a wonderful teaching about this in Matthew 12. Let me turn to that lesson on verse 43. When the unclean spirit has gone out of a person, it wanders through waterless regions looking for a resting place, but it finds none. Then it says, I will return to my house from which I came. When it comes, it finds it empty, swept, and put in order. Then it goes and brings along 7 other spirits more evil than itself, and they enter and live there. And the last state of that person is worse than the first. So will it be also with this evil generation. Now, what's wonderful about that teaching? You might ask. Well, the master teacher is speaking about a person who was in a house full of evil spirits, and this house was all swept out and clean and clear, emptied. However, he went back and the spirits that he brought were darker than the ones that went out. Let me help with a possible interpretation. It's not enough to empty the mind only. It must be replaced. What's in the mind must be replaced with observations that are spiritually informed. Spiritually informed descriptions of our life and our world. Because when our observations about our world are spiritually informed, they don't cloud up the consciousness. When they're spiritually informed, they don't cloud up our consciousness. They clarify. They support the clarity. For example, yesterday I spoke to one of my neighbors who's moving from the neighborhood to Arizona. She can't take any more of the riffraff that's been moving in. Bottom line. Well, I left that thought in mind for a while, and my day was unfolding. And how was I seeing my neighborhood? Well, that's a pretty good idea. There is a lot of riffraff here. Maybe I should take the idea and begin to take steps to get away from it. Yeah, like look at this house, how they keep their garbage. Their lawn's not kept. See, the seven spirits, pretty soon, sight, sound, taste, touch, smell, precognition, and premonition, those negatives will just begin expressing through the whole being if we don't catch it. Can you hear that? But when our observations are spiritually informed, they don't cloud up the consciousness. When they're not spiritually informed, they cloud up consciousness, and we walk around in a muddy state of impaired vision. An impaired vision that keeps each of us from seeing a wonderful, peaceful, serene life of right-heartedness and joy. And our whole experience on this earth becomes one of mild misery. So our business, and we're all about the business, you and I, we're about the business of learning to identify specific thought forms that we create with our little thinker up here that cause a kind of murkiness in our vision of life. Be on the lookout. There are many of them. There are many things that we do which are not spiritually informed, and all those wacky ways we use our head to create a sense of reality that's not true. Any one of those negative thoughts can cause the murkiness. And ones that I'm finding after 25 years in ministry, in the conversations, the emails, the phone calls, the social media, the meetings that I've attended, what I've observed, there is almost an epidemic of anxiety, if you will. And this anxiousness, like a presence of anxiousness, I've observed is going on in our world, hit and miss, day to day. Anxiety over possible nuclear war, tariffs, terrorists, the economy, shootings, anxiety, anxiousness, over a whole lot of other hard experiences that cross our radar screen, that are reported in the media, that we're part of. And we're each exposed to a certain amount of media, and it's easy to see something, or just a conversation with a neighbor, and one of those dark thoughts comes across the screen of our awareness here. And we say, that could happen to me. How many of you know what I'm talking about? How many get my drift? Sure. We do that when we do. And every time we create with that kind of thought, our consciousness gets a little murky. It can be said that with all the media and the internet exposure, it's a lot tougher to maintain a state of clarity and therefore a state of inner peace and ease about our life. We tend to be vulnerable for creating a state of anxiousness and just going on about our day, having to put up with it, live with it. Now, if we're going to live in a state of anxiety in our life, two things have to be present. Two things. There has to be our value system, and an imagined future. For anxiety is the result of slipping into the future a little bit and expecting that something's going to happen that my value system would prefer not to happen. An example would be when I have a full tank of gas, or when I'm getting ready to leave for Uni of Vancouver and the gas tank shows it's on E. What's the emotion? If you're going to go anywhere in your vehicle and you don't have gas, you're going to be concerned. You value gas when you're in your car. The emotion that's created is anxiety, anxiousness, until you get that fuel. Now, when we came into the earth experience, we were each born and came out of the womb with only two fears, just two. One is the fear of sudden loss of support. If you hold an infant and you suddenly stop supporting that infant, they will be startled. They will more than likely make a sound. They're afraid of the loss of support. And the second is that if you make a loud noise, and that's about it. Those two. You can sit there and tell them almost anything about the world, and they could care less. Their minds are clear, and they don't muddy their minds up with information. But are you and I any different? We each have that initial system of values. And we have a value system that's pretty universal. Might be one that says, don't make loud noises in my presence. Now, how many can say that that's your preference? Yeah, very good. Even if you can see that they're going to happen. The very moment that you would prefer no loud, sudden noise, the very moment that you perceive that the possibility is going to happen, what's the tendency to create? What kind? Yeah. How many don't want me to do this? Do it? We're voting. We all survived. But anxiety requires two things in addition to having a value system. To create anxiety, you've got to leave the secure reality of this moment and slip into the future with an imagined version of that which you are fearing. Let that register. To create anxiety, you've got to leave the secure reality of this moment and slip in to the future with an imagined version of that which you're fearing. Can anyone not see that? That registered. Now, there's a piece of wonderful spiritual wisdom that, if practiced by you and I with absolute integrity, it will preserve us from ever creating a sense of anxiety again. It comes from Matthew 6:34. Let's go there. Now, I have the King James Version that I prefer. Take therefore no thought for the morrow, for the morrow shall take thought for the things of itself. Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. The tendency to want to keep the past in play and not let it go each day. Take therefore no thought for the morrow shall take thought for the things of itself. Sufficient unto the day is the challenge thereof. Friends, all the information we need to make anxiety a thing of the past is right there, isn't it? Take no thought for the morrow. Don't stew about what could be. He's not suggesting not planning. It's not about that. Plan your day. But take no thought for tomorrow is saying, don't confuse any thought you might have about what tomorrow will bring to you with the reality of the now moment. Don't confuse your thinking with the reality of tomorrow that will only reveal itself when? Can anyone take Monday morning's breath right now? Let's do it. Enough, he said. God's giving you and I a great big plate of present moment now, living. Let's deal with it. That's your agenda. That's our curriculum. Take no thought for the morrow. Let's allow our breathing to be focused on what's happening as the breath rises and falls. Keep your attention there. That's what's occurring that matters in this moment. Keep your attention right there, and you will never again create a terrible, terrible bondage of anxiousness. Will things happen that are hard to deal with, you might ask? Absolutely. There's no guarantee that you won't have challenges to deal with. But if you're going to deal with them, and your investment and productivity will be in dealing with them, not sitting and stewing and worrying about it and about them. How can you solve something that's a fantasy in the mind? You can't deal with it when it's in the mind. But when the event does occur, if it does occur, what do? You deal with it. You face it. And you get it done. Jesus' teaching, I believe, is so beautiful. It's life's invitation for each of us to put into our remembrances. When we catch ourselves creating anxiousness like a presence, say to yourself, there I go again, creating anxiety. It's not like you get an anxious germ. God, I'm infected with anxiety again. No. Darn. there I go, creating anxiousness about an imagined future. Remember what Jesus taught. Clear the water. It's in our thinking. It's where the work's done. Take no thought for the morrow. Get your attention back to the moment. Now, how many can feel yourself slipping a little bit into the future with your imagination? Watch that imagination because it's powerful. But if you'll take this lesson to heart and take no thought for the morrow, remember that tomorrow shall take thought of the things of itself. In other words, when it gets here, it will reveal to you what business is yours. Sufficient for the day is what it is revealing to you and I right now. That's all God's asking you to deal with. Whatever's clear and present in front of you, asking for your participation, you can deal with it. Can you hear this? This is a powerful way to maximize your productivity and to keep this from getting all mucked up, stewing, getting all mucked up again. And when you begin to experience the wisdom of remembering that these thoughts about terrible things happening are just thoughts. When you begin to experience the wisdom, you begin to impose on your mind a wonderful capacity to return to its original clarity. See me later, I'll give you the magic formula. Just one little remembrance of truth, spiritual truth, can restore integrity and clear the mind and the peaceful heart. Because we don't know what's going to happen to that imagination when it gets rolling and engaged about the unknown future. But I believe it was Mark Twain who suggested, God, in my life, I've suffered thousands and thousands of terrible things, and some of them even happened. But most of them don't. Thank you. I trust you to remember.